Hi muckers, welcome back to my YouTube channel. As you can tell, we are not in our current setup, and the reason for that is because I'm currently traveling to Paris and I'm just staying in a hotel overnight, but that is not going to stop me from filming videos because, as you know, we have been on a roll and I've really been enjoying connecting with all of you. So I was thinking, what can I do whenever I'm not in my normal setup? And then I realized that I have a bunch of like script-esque videos that I created whenever I was actually on tour, and I never got around to filming all of them. Basically, the concept was me deep diving different topics and different niches and kind of giving all my thoughts in a timeline of events. We did these a couple months ago, as you can remember. And I have some ones left. And the one I really want to do today was basically my notes on Trisha Paytas' reinvention and how she was able to like save her career, but not only save her career from like the worst place that it ever was, but completely rebrand to a big mainstream career that she never had before. And now there's a lot of really interesting details in this, and to kind of cut a long story short, I believe that the main reason that Trisha Paytas' career, other than hard work and stuff, obviously I'm not taking away from that, I think is the Colleen Ballinger scandal, and we're going to dive into all of it. If you're not subscribed to my YouTube channel, please consider subscribing. I would really appreciate it. And kind of let's get into my notes here. So, Trisha Paytas, as we know, is basically a very not now, but was a polarizing figure on YouTube, and she managed to rebuild her career in such a successful way that people, when they think of Trisha Paytas now, they think of these big achievements that she's doing in mainstream or her podcast, whereas a couple of years ago, people would automatically go to scandals or feuds or fights or times that she did incredibly problematic things. And it really is a testament to Trisha's ability to basically reinvent herself, but a lot of YouTubers, when they get canceled, reinvent themselves. And also the word canceled is not lost on me, how like it means nothing anymore. But just in this context, we're going to use it. Trisha has the elements of the words that I was able to think of that really, when I sum up Trisha, are kind of redemption, reinvention, and with this new era of Trisha that has been the most successful yet, it has really relied on self-awareness. And I think that that is why this one is sticking, whereas in the past, Trisha's comebacks haven't lasted very long. I think that Trisha is honing in a lot within the last couple of years on this like self-awareness, and I think that the public really appreciate that. So obviously, as we know, one of the main things that was the recent fallbacks of Trisha was frenemies. Now, I could sit here and I could, list every single thing that Trisha Paytas has done wrong in the public's eyes, or every scandal she has done, every minority she has offended. Like we could play that, but I think that we've talked about that enough. I want to focus on the current things and kind of the last couple of years rather than going back, 5, 10, 15 years. And the reason I want to do that is because my sole purpose on this video is how she was able to change the trajectory of her career, which really stems from frenemies on, rather than anything before. And I'm not taking away from anything Trisha has done. I'm not trying to dismiss anything Trisha's done. If you are a real viewer of me, you know that we have covered those things extensively, and you know that the internet has covered those things extensively. So I want to basically focus, and our starting point is going to be frenemies, because I think I was on the way to Dallas when I wrote this, and it was a bumpy ass flight. So I was manically writing as much as I can. We are going to start from frenemies, okay? So obviously, as we know, frenemies was Trisha Paytas and Ethan Klein, coming together to do a podcast, and it was called Frenemies, and frenemies was perfection. Like, it was obviously something that, looking back, would not have worked in the long run, which it didn't. It was obviously very doomed from the start. However, when it was good, and the dynamic was good for being rocky, but obviously that would not last long term. It was very much so like lightning. Like, that's kind of how I would think of frenemies, right? Like, it was intense, there was sparks, and it was crazy. Like, obviously, people are like, I want frenemies back. If you care for Ethan or you care for Trisha, you genuinely would not wish for frenemies to come back, because it was clearly at like the lowest points of both of them. For Ethan, yeah. Well, I don't know. But for Trisha, at least, it was definitely very clearly the lowest moment of her life. It was it was an internet moment. It was something that we will not see again for a very, very, very long time. You have Trisha Paytas and all of her baggage, and Ethan Klein and all of his baggage, kind of putting their baggage onto each other and like basically just fighting anyone that comes in their way. If you go back and rewatch Frenemies, they almost like trauma bonded over hating people. And at that time of the internet, that was the content that people really enjoyed. And I really enjoyed Frenemies watching it because it was like, you didn't know what was going to come next. You didn't know if they were going to fight James Charles. You didn't know if they were going to fight Joey Graceffa. You didn't know if they were going to fight each other. You genuinely could not predict the episodes. And that's why it was such a success, because it was unpredictable. But obviously that unpredictableness of it could not have made it sustainable. So the chemistry was great, but it was... They were two big characters, and I also do think as well that when I look back on Frenemies, in the moment, a lot of people said that Trisha Paytas bad, Ethan Klein good. I don't think things are as black and white as what people think of when we like look back on it now. I think Frenemies very clearly was, in my opinion at least, Trisha Paytas being very vulnerable and Ethan Klein kind of playing into that and triggering her, and Trisha Paytas very clearly was very easily triggered. And I think that Ethan Klein knew the more that Trisha got triggered, the more she acted out and the more the episode would be more entertaining. However, when push comes to shove, that would be the very thing that would end the entire podcast. And I don't think it's crazy to think that both of them were toxic in that situation. I think that Trisha Paytas was bad during Frenemies when she would bring up family drama and she was, trying to do a wedge in between Moses and his family. We can play both sides here. And Ethan for constantly triggering Trisha and also trying to do a wedge between Moses and her. Both of them were really bad to each other on Frenemies, and it would not have worked in the long run, nor should it have. Now, a lot of people have a lot of other opinions as well on the ending of Frenemies and why it didn't work, which people bring up Moses, people bring up Ela, people bring up a plethora of other people. For this instance, I just want to focus on Ethan and Trisha because we've talked about other scenarios as well. Now, Frenemies was like something that people were scared of within the industry. Like influencers would literally talk about how they would be scared that they were going to get talked about on Frenemies. It was that big of a medium. And it was, a show of like commentary, drama, fights, loving moments. Like it was everything and more. And I think that the way the public looked at it in the moment was that like Trisha was unstable and like Ethan was the one to be able to make her stable again, which is a weird narrative that like when you think of Just Trish now, that shows that actually Trisha didn't need a co-host nor a man to kind of correct her, which is what the public were like, Trisha would take it too far and then Ethan would rein her in. When you think back on it now and also look at how Trisha's career is and Ethan's career is, you kind of focus a little bit more on maybe Ethan had more involvement than what people think, and maybe Ethan was more toxic than what people think. I just think it's interesting to kind of look back because I think that people glazed Ethan a lot and blamed Trisha for a lot in the fallout of Frenemies. And while she is responsible for a lot of things that happened that went wrong with Frenemies, I also think that now seeing what Ethan Klein does to other people provides a little bit more context to possibly what Trisha and co were dealing with. And that's not me trying to be bitchy here. So as we know, each episode was unpredictable. And because it was unpredictable, you never knew if it was going to be the last episode. You didn't know if Trisha walking out now was going to be the last time she would walk out. You didn't know if this fight was going to be the last fight ever. And I think that was what made the show exciting, but also kind of made it that like it was draining on the characters, but the audience were loving it, which was clearly draining to both of them and also started affecting both of their family lives. Now, basically, in June 2021 was whenever things started really getting bad for Frenemies. And it was, these live fights, these live stormites, and this 2021 time was, as we all know, when, it started, it was done. It was done, and there was no returning. There was no fucking returning. The fights for Frenemies ending were over family drama, money. He gets that 5%. Remember from Callie, love you, no shade. I just love that soundbite so much. Fights with family, money. I think also I had written down here like creative control. And I think that they both started to fight over like that domain of like whose show it was. And I think Trisha started to show real frustration with the fact that like everything was on the H3 channel. And obviously they should have agreed with that in the long term. So I think Trisha's kind of in the wrong with that. Now, the tension was building because they were fighting and bickering over these things, and with every week, the fights were getting more and more serious. And then, Trisha would walk off air mid-episode, and then the internet would respond to that. They would be on Ethan's side, they would gang up against Trisha, and then would Trisha come back? We don't know. Very, very, very toxic. Anyways, all this to say that in the ending of Frenemies, Trisha's public standing was horrible. The internet hated Trisha Paytas at the ending of Frenemies. And I would argue that the way Frenemies ended, leveraged more hate towards her. And I think that Ethan and H3 really relied on this hate mob against Trisha for sure for the remaining weeks on their channel and even the remaining months and years. It was very, very, very beneficial for them. And the internet just didn't like Trisha Paytas at all with the ending. And I would say that throughout any scandal, any fucking thing Trisha Paytas has ever been called out for, I think the biggest rip to her reputation and the biggest hit to her career was the ending of Frenemies. Did it need to end? Yes. The way it ended definitely affected her career so much that even I thought that there was no coming back from it at all for Trisha Paytas, because the internet had invested so much in Frenemies and people were picking sides, and it looked like everyone had taken Ethan's side. And again, we look back on things now with a different perspective of Ethan, and there is more involvement from Ethan than what we probably knew in the moment. And now, it was such an ugly breakup as well. Trisha was doing videos, exposing the cast members and H3 members and Ethan, and then Ethan would do these long, videos on Trisha as well. They were doing this back and forth, and it would never go in Trisha's favor, and it would always go in Ethan's favor. Therefore, Trisha's reputation, the more she tried to fight back, was dwindling by the fucking minute. And again, I really thought that there was no coming back for Trisha from this. It was that bad, and she really wasn't helping it. But again, I can't imagine. And also, I fed into it as well, taking accountability with the content that I was making about Trisha, and I was heavily siding with Ethan. I have a huge role to play in that as well, and it definitely, has taught me something in terms of like the dogpiling. Like it does exist and it is real. And it's made me really think, about things I've experienced with kind of what I've contributed to on the internet. And I think I can't change anything I've done. However, moving forward, I would like to apply what I now know whenever things like this happen. You know what I mean? So this was an ugly, ugly, ugly breakup. There was screenshots being leaked. There were the H3, team speaking out, more screenshots, family drama, accusations. It was just absolutely fucking horrendous. It was so bad. And again, fans were taking sides, and a majority of the internet were taking Ethan's side. I don't know if people remember, but in the aftermath of Frenemies, H3 was at its peak. They were never getting more views than what I could see. And Trisha was genuinely stagnant on her YouTube channel. She was uploading every kind of content, ASMR, vlogs, all these different things, main channel videos, and all of them were getting less views than what drama channels were making content of her on. Like, people not only weren't interested in hearing Trisha out anymore, for the first time in a long time, people weren't interested in hearing from Trisha at all. And that was a really probably scary sign for Trisha that, like, is my career done? And a lot of us behind the scenes didn't know how she was going to recover, because even when we stopped talking about the situation, she was still uploading and the views had left significantly. Like, she faced such backlash and a lingering effect from Frenemies because Ethan had the public on his side. Now, it really, really, really was so bad. Now, I think it's important to note that whenever we kind of move on, that was my first page of notes, and then I go on. So that was my frenemies. I think it's important to note that from 2021 until 2023, this was a very slow, gradual period of Trisha Paytas, in my opinion, building up her viewership again by staying out of drama, not calling people out, and focusing on this, like, accountability, self-awareness era. Now, this really started to work for her, where people were starting to see that she wasn't fighting people, she wasn't exposing people, and Trisha was openly making videos being like, I disagree with calling Charlie D'Amelio out, I disagree with calling Dixie D'Amelio out, and she's like, I just want to, I want to do me. I want to live my life. And I think that Trisha also, getting pregnant and giving birth as well really fucking helped this momentum again in her career within the 2021 to 2023, because it's important to note that people online love when a YouTuber gets pregnant. They love that shit. Don't ask me why. I think it's weird. And people are so invested in a family channel moment. And Trisha, announced that she was pregnant. And there was an added layer to that, because Trisha had talked about her struggle with infertility in the past, that a lot of old viewership came back because they were excited and happy for her. And she was documenting this pregnancy journey. And because she was documenting a pregnancy journey, and she was actively staying out of drama and actively apologizing to people and actively being self-aware that she wasn't doing the content she was once exposed for, the audience started coming back slowly and gradually, because now you couldn't argue that Trisha Paytas was being problematic anymore. So she really worked on that. But what I will say is, even when she gave birth and all the rest, she was, gaining popularity again. But in the eyes of the public, it was still that lingering effects of frenemies. Now, what I truly, truly, truly believe changed Trisha's career forever was the Colleen Ballinger scandal. Because if you do not remember, Colleen and Trisha created a podcast after frenemies, and it was called Oversharing. It was called Oversharing. And it was Colleen Ballinger, Trisha Paytas, and they did like a Broadway theme, which is so ironic now. And it was a really weird pairing from, like, the internet find it really strange. This was when Colleen Ballinger was still liked on the internet. But believe it or not, when the podcast was announced, Colleen Ballinger was getting backlash for ever working with Trisha Paytas, which is crazy to think about now. Like, it's crazy to think about now that Colleen was getting backlash for working with Trisha, and Colleen was actively saying publicly about how she knows that Trisha's problematic. She knows that Trisha's problematic, which, again, when you've got your own skeletons in your closet, she was basically passing off that she was going to lose sponsorships by working with Trisha or lose public interest by working with Trisha, but that's her friend. That's her friend. Now, when they did this podcast, it was very weird to me. It very clearly looked like Trisha trying to emulate another podcast, because she's had so many, The Dish with Trish, Frenemies, she's had other, like, she's had so many podcasts that, like, I think that she was waiting for one of them to stick, so she tried it with a co-host, with Colleen. And I think, I truly believe that Colleen thought the podcast was going to be successful, but I think that Colleen did the podcast more because she enjoyed making fun of Trisha, that mentally for her, she probably enjoyed the ability to kind of be nice to her face and then talk shit about her behind the scenes, which is what we inevitably find out. Now, whenever they started the podcast, none other than yours truly started making videos and public statements to Trisha Paytas, basically saying, Trisha, Colleen is not your friend. Colleen has talked so much shit about you to me. She has sent me it was, I think at that stage, like Patreon or whatever, of like, Trisha's body. Johnny as well, Johnny Silvestri, shout out Johnny Silvestri, had said these same things. And we were basically trying to warn Trisha that Colleen Ballinger was not your friend, and she was actually your enemy, who genuinely, like, you were a laughing stock to her, and that Colleen was evil, basically. And then, obviously, that was kind of ignored, honestly, and I understand that that was ignored by Trisha, because, again, I had called Trisha out during the frenemies days, so why would Trisha listen to someone who made hate videos, essentially? Like, if you want to look at it, how Trisha probably looks at it, which I didn't mean for them to be hate videos. Again, I've kind of learned my lesson on the content I used to make. Why would you listen to that whenever your friend Colleen's here, who you've known for so long? So Trisha didn't listen to any of us, and that was fine. I understand why she didn't listen to us as well. Now, whenever Cody Tyler brought up the Colleen Ballinger allegations, and we don't need to get into all that, that's when things started to change. So again, in 2023, a couple episodes after they had, started, I can't remember what episode they got to. I think it might have been up to 10. I don't know. They did a couple episodes anyways. Is that my mom texting me good night? My mom has texted me about my nana. I'll respond to that later. Anyways, so I think that it's important to note that they got to a certain amount of episodes anyways, and then the Colleen allegations were like brewing in the last couple episodes of it. And Colleen and Trisha were together, filming whenever these allegations were making it to the mainstream. And it seemed that both of them were actively avoiding it until they couldn't avoid it anymore. And so inevitably, inevitably, whenever the allegations got, to entire mainstream, the podcast with Trisha just stopped being uploaded. And obviously what we then learned was that Colleen and Trisha did film like a last episode where like Colleen behind the scenes spoke to Trisha about like what I had been saying and what Johnny had been saying. And then they decided not to air that episode, which for better, for worse, it kind of kept Trisha out of, major backlash. Now, what was interesting about the Colleen thing is, again, the person who was calling Colleen out was me, and me and Trisha had a bad history. So I understand why Trisha didn't jump to like not defend me and side with Colleen. But that didn't last very long. When it got too much and when the Trisha stuff came out, that was when Trisha, changed her tune. When Johnny showed proof of, Colleen doing these like viewing parties of Trisha's like OnlyFans, Patreon, naked content, that was when Trisha had like solid proof that Colleen wasn't a friend. And the public, remember, were watching this all unfold and were very against Colleen and being very supportive, thank God, of the people that were speaking up against Colleen, like myself. So Trisha, who was once a defender of Colleen, like defending so much, now I had this choice to make. Do I double down in supporting Colleen and be a good friend, or do I grow past Colleen and address what's going on with risk of getting backlash? And so for the first time, I would say, in a long time for Trisha's career, she actually didn't be the friend to the problematic person like Shane or whatever. She actually walked away from Colleen and she publicly distanced herself, which I think really, in the long term, showed the public a different side of Trisha. I'm going to be honest. She admitted that she ignored red flags, and she recognized that she kind of has this blind loyalty to friends. And she also acknowledged that what I was saying was true. Now, there's a lot to unpack with that. Number one, acknowledging what I've said is true, even though we have a rocky history, gave her a lot of praise in the community because people were like, wow, like Adam and Trisha don't like each other, but she was willing to hear him out and side with him over her friend. The fact that she also acknowledged that she ignored red flags and blindly supports, her friends when they're being problematic showed a level of vulnerability and self-awareness, which I believe for the first time in Trisha's career, she showed self-awareness, which changed the public's tune towards her to a level of, wow, Trisha's a mother now. She's seemingly grown up. She's not involved in drama and she's self-aware. The public's perception completely changed. And not only had it completely changed in, wow, Trisha is now a good person, if you will, but because Trisha had done the podcast with Colleen, the public overwhelmingly sympathized with Trisha that who could be so evil to be doing something like this to Trisha and sit beside them every week on a podcast. So Trisha had every aspect of the internet almost sympathizing with her, which really worked for cleaning up her image. Now, this moment was, the word I have here is pivotal, like absolutely pivotal. Trisha has talked about accountability in the past, but it's always been kind of half-assed, if I'm being honest, and it's also been, I've already apologized for things like that or whatever. This was the first time that it seemed that Trisha really honed in on actually wanting to like listen, learn, actual real accountability. And it wasn't presented in any other way that she's ever done before when she's been involved in a scandal or whatever. And keep in mind, she is also the victim here with what Colleen was doing to her. She was very calm and collected in her response video, and people thought she was going to be angry and screaming and kitchen floor. And she did the opposite, which got a lot of people being like, wow, she's matured a lot, which again, changed the public's perception of her. So I just think as well that I also want to, I'm not trying to make this about myself in any way because I think this relies on Colleen, but I do also think that for a community like I was in at that time with the drama community that were making videos calling Trisha out, I think a big thing in terms of me and Trisha forgiving each other kind of mended a lot of bridges within the drama channel. And also Trisha Paytas spear. I'm not trying to big myself up here. I do just think that that is fact. And I think that that ultimately helped her as well because, again, the people that were calling you out, you were now making amends with both ways. And there was accountability on both sides. And I think that a lot of bridges were mended there. And the audiences of mine that were calling her out were like, oh, she's not as bad as what she is. I think that it was that like storm, right? Now, this is now setting the scene for Trisha has been so wronged with this podcast with Colleen. She's going to create her own podcast. All eyes, Trisha has probably never got this much attention in her entire career of mainstream media watching what her next move was going to be, because people felt so sorry for her, as they should. She was the victim here. Sorry, I had to burp. But anyways, Trisha capitalized off of this like turning point in her career of being wronged by Colleen, doing the podcast with her. What's she gonna do next? That she was so fucking clever, dude. And she created a podcast that was just gonna be her. How fucking clever. Obviously, it doesn't sound very clever because it's literally just a podcast, but someone who's been so known for doing podcasts with guests, right off the bat of being wronged by your fucking co-host, creating a podcast and calling it Just Trish, and the branding of it being, it's just Trish, you know, you can just rely on yourself. Fucking genius. And the public ate it up. And so the podcast with Colleen, you know, obviously stopped. Trisha did this, and the first couple episodes were following the Colleen topic and Trisha's opinion on stuff to do with Colleen. So those audiences were coming over to hear what she was saying. Then she was introducing hot topics with it, and then she slowly phased out talking about Colleen, and the audience stayed. It was a very, very, very clever pivot for Trisha. And also, it was like a level of like Trisha finally, for once, standing on her own. People started to revisit frenemies and what Ethan and hers dynamic was, and basically say, wow, Trisha's very different when she's on her own. And I think that ultimately the concept of Trisha Paytas being able to control 100% her podcast, the editing, what's shown, it not being live, ultimately is a recipe for a delicious pie. You know what I mean? A delicious pie. And I think it was very, 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 very clever. So I think as well that Just Trish almost became this like starting point in Trisha's career. Like there's like a before and after Trish. You know what I mean? And I think that Just Trish On was this new career of Trisha. And I think that she knew and she honed in on it. You know, Just Trish was like this clean slate in her career, like starting fresh. The public were on her side. Don't fuck it up, you know? She talked about pop culture. She didn't lose that audience, but she was talking about motherhood and, you know, referencing, you know, maturing and growing up, and people loved that. And also, she was very, very, very self-aware in these first couple episodes, unlike anything she'd ever been before. Now, the success of the podcast was undeniable. Again, it was blowing up, getting millions of views. She was focusing on these hot topics. She was having Rosanna Pansino on. She would talk about Colleen with Rosanna. She would have Tana on. She would talk about Colleen with... She was honing in on the Colleen topic for sure, but as she should have, she was someone who was so wronged by Colleen, she can do whatever the fuck she wants like the rest of us. But I think that it was just a perfect storm for her when she had such a muddled career as a way of being able to start fresh. And she really took that. And I think that that was the thing that completely saved her career, if I'm being honest. Now, I think that Trisha's kind of rebirth was a little bit more calculated than what people think. I think that she took accountability for like everything but she openly was like, I need to like stop apologizing. Like we need to move forward. We need to start this new era. So I think she was like, she wasn't like apologizing for her past anymore. She was like saying that she was going to learn from her past, which is so much better. You know what I mean? And she also would reference her past, but in a way of like learning from it. So she wasn't hiding from her past anymore, so people couldn't use it against her. And also, she, for the first time, started to really diversify what she was doing. She wasn't just uploading vlogs anymore. She was, you know, podcasting. She was touring, and eventually, as we know it now, doing Broadway. And she basically had this perfect timing. You know, when Colleen disappeared, Trisha filled that gap for people. She filled the gap that Colleen left, one of the biggest content creators, and also mainstream other people started to get to know Trisha. The frenemies people came back. Ethan Klein was not in good standing at this point, so the frenemies people that then took his side started taking Trisha's side again. It was bumfuck crazy. It was bumfuck fucking crazy. She literally didn't even need like a PR redemption, which a lot of people do. She kind of just, it fell into her lap. It was absolutely perfect for her. And so, moving on, this is what I have, which is like, Trisha had been, you know, killing it with Just Trish, focusing, staying in her lane, focusing on this brand. I think it's important to note that I think that Trisha has been solely focusing on a brand from Just Trish on. And I think the brand has been mommy, Wendy Williams pop culture-esque, staying out of drama, but covering drama, befriending influencers, but not being friends with them. I think it's been clever. It's been clever. It's been clever. And by 2024, Trisha had signed with CAA, which is a huge agency. And this was like a leap into mainstream representation, which, by the way, gives a level of credibility past a YouTuber whenever you're now represented by a huge firm like CAA. So obviously, you know, we're a couple years into Just Trish now, and then Trisha goes on tour. What's really interesting is Trisha had gone on tour before, actually with the same tour company that I had gone on tour with, and we actually talked about that whenever we met at her show in New York. She had gone on tour a couple times, but the only reason that it would sell, as she would admit herself, was if she was dating Jason Nash, or, you know, she was in a Vlog Squad video, or people would promote her. But for the first time ever, Trisha was going on tour in 10 times the size of venues that she had ever done and selling them out. And the reason for that was because Trisha had now built up the biggest parasocial dedicated audience from leveraging what Colleen did to her until now. People felt bad for her. People wanted to defend her. That is a level in parasocial within itself. But then Trisha worked to keep them by continuing to show that she was dedicated to this rebrand of herself. And people were almost like along for a journey. People love a journey. People love a journey. She does the Eras of Trish tour. Genius branding, by the way, the Taylor Swift. It sells out. It was 30 cities, I think, sold out shows. And also Trisha then became, you know, someone that was like really popular to like and popular to like meme on, that it went from people making fun of Trisha Paytas on the bedroom floor or kitchen floor to dressing up as Trisha on the kitchen floor, going to her tour, you know, dressing up as a chicken nugget to her tour. There became a level of we can now make fun of Trisha's past because we know that Trisha is not that person anymore, which is important to know. And so anyways, it shows that this was now like part of the culture of Trisha Paytas. Now, what's so interesting to note about Trisha and Colleen is that Colleen gloats about getting these mainstream opportunities. She got Waitress and she was stunt casted in Waitress, and this was her full brand that she was in Broadway, right? And Colleen actually speaks about the fact that she was offered another Broadway show, but the scandal ended up losing it for her. Lol. Trisha then, in a surprising turn of events, well, not surprising really, when you know, you can see the trajectory of her career now and building on that brand. Having a brand is so important when you're an influencer. Otherwise, you're just one of the other ones, and we don't know what to, you know, give you. But with Trisha, we know that she wants to be on Broadway. We know she wants to be on stage. We know So when Trisha gets stunt casted in Broadway, Beetlejuice the musical, it is a perfect casting because obviously it's a stunt casting. These happen, and there's nothing wrong with stunt casting. But with Trisha, because inherently Trisha isn't the best singer or the best dancer, and she will say these things, people root for her because she's relatable and they like seeing her live their dreams, and people kind of see an element of themselves in Trisha. So people root for her being on Broadway, and she did her own Broadway show as well, and she got these mainstream fucking, you know, Broadway stars to come because of these agencies. And once you have a great agency behind you, and once you build up networking, and I think for the first time Trisha was leaving her house and networking, that all benefited her. And again, this was her focusing on her brand and not focusing on being messy, but focusing on how can being messy benefit her brand. You know what I mean? And so I think the fact as well that Trisha has had a long history of talking about her love for Beetlejuice, it really honed the internet's parasocial in terms of being excited for her getting Beetlejuice even more. And it'll be interesting to see what Trisha Paytas does for Beetlejuice, because I closely follow Broadway and peaks and pivots and downfalls and money loss and stuff. And Beetlejuice is actually, from what I'm seeing right now, not making a lot of money on Broadway. That it'll be interesting to see if Trisha Paytas can really surge them in income. That will be a lot of testament to her. And the more that Trisha sells out venues, the more she does her own Broadway show, the more people know within the industry that she can fill a room. And what it depends on in the end of the day is, can you make people spend money? And Trisha can. You know, Trisha also is showing that she has a work ethic. She is willing to work for things, and people, the audience and people in the industry, respect that. You can give a lot of credit to the Colleen thing and all the rest, but it's important to note that Trisha Paytas works. She works and works. Like, she's one of the, she's never off that damn chair recording a video. You know what I mean? But that shows that she is a work ethic, and people really appreciate that. Now, I think that, you know, Trisha's career, shows so many ups and downs and ups and downs, but I think that we're finally seeing a time when Trisha will steadily be on the up because for once she is focused on Trisha Paytas, the brand, rather than Trisha Paytas, the person. And I think that that is a clever, clever, clever way for her to progress, so that she doesn't get involved in shit any further. And I think that I do believe that the Colleen thing was a big reason. When Colleen vanished, Trisha evolved, if you will. And I think that Trisha really focused on trying to win back the audience rather than force them to like her again. And it was gradual and she worked on it. And it's crazy how she is now one of the biggest influencers, I would say, with media opportunities. And merely a couple of years ago, she was getting less views than, I don't even know what to compare to, less views than videos that were being made about her by H3 or something like that. You know what I mean? Her views were really bad a couple of years ago because she was so affected by the scandals. The audiences had left her. Merely years later, she has built up literally an empire. And I think that there's something to be said about that. I really, really, really enjoyed this little deep dive. I find it very, very, very interesting. And what's so funny was I had written this, right, whenever I was in Dallas, and I had written up until the Colleen Ballinger section. And then it was a couple days ago that I actually decided to kind of focus on, you know, her tour and focus on the eras of Trish and focus on Broadway because obviously that has just happened. And it's so funny because I had written this probably back in February. Or maybe it was whenever I was in Houston. I was in Texas anyways when I was writing this. And it's funny how Trisha's career has only been on the up since I started writing about Trisha's career being on the up. It's interesting. I find like influencer culture and audience parasocialism very, 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 very interesting. So let me know your opinion. We can talk about it down below and I will see y'all very soon. And let me know your thoughts and we'll talk down below and goodbye.